as I mentioned earlier, like I had a brain tumor. I also lost my mother to cancer. And these are some of the most traumatic events in my life. I also had a business that failed and went bankrupt. And so like these are pivotal moments in my life. When I look at a stressor, I always look back at those events and say, does this compare to those other stressors I had? The answer is no. And then the second question is, did I get over those stressors and did I smile again and have an amazing life after those stressors kind of settled down? And the answer was yes. I do agree that fasting is a fantastic approach for longevity. That fasting is going to be more impactful for that woman who's 30 pounds overweight than it will be for me. Why? Well, I have low body fat percentage. I'm very physically active. I do a lot of cardio and weightlifting.
Hey everyone, Derek Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Y'all are going to love this one. We've been talking about aging a lot, and so I was reaching out to try and get some of the movers in this field on the podcast. And I'm really excited to announce that today my conversation is with Chris Mirabile, who is the founder and CEO of Novos, who is kind of changing the game in the measurement world of aging. So Novos does a lot of different things. We're going to talk about them in this podcast. But we talk a lot about measuring your biological age and then what are the things that you can do to change that. It's hard to say that you're changing something if you don't have a way of measuring it. So that was my real excitement in connecting with Chris, because they have the best of the best when it comes to scientists and information and what metrics we need to look at if we're starting to implement these anti-aging strategies. So I'll kind of give y'all a slight insight. This will be something that you hear more about around our office and some of the programs that we run that we know help people get healthier and heal better. But now we want to know how much do those move the needle in terms of aging. So very, very interesting. If you have any interest at all in staying healthier longer, this is going to be a great podcast for you to listen to. And we get into some of the latest science around the causes of aging. Can we actually reverse aging? Can we slow it down? How much? And what could we expect to feel like if we do all the right things throughout our life? What does 90 or 100 feel like? And we get into all the metrics around that: psychological, physical, chemical, cellular, everything in there. You're going to love this episode. I think we go in and out of the science really, really well. So without further ado, enjoy this wide-ranging conversation around health and aging with Chris Mirabile. Chris, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast, my man.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I was telling you before we started, this couldn't come at a better time in terms of our talk with aging. We've put out a lot more content. We've been kind of talking with patients about it. And my avenue into this world has been slightly different because I've been a pain specialist for 15 years now. And one of the things that we started to realize quite early was like some of the big things that started to affect people was when they were having a movement problem, whether that was an injury or a surgery or they were presenting with pain, is how much that change in their activity level and the kind of stress of the pain, so to speak, accelerated aging. And it was just a very interesting thing. And I mean, even early on, I was like, you look younger as the pain starts to go away. And then, of course, as time goes and you're getting people healthy and they're like, hey, what's next? I feel good. Now I want to keep feeling good as long as I possibly can. Of course, we start studying more and more of this stuff. What was your avenue into kind of paying more attention to this world?
Wow. So yeah, my story goes back to an early age, earlier than you would expect when it comes to the topic of longevity. So I was interested in health. When I was 12 years old, I started exercising and reading Men's Health magazine. But then when I was 16 years old, I was suddenly struck by a seizure, which was caused by a brain tumor. And I had to get emergency surgery. And going through that experience really It changed my perspective on life in every sense, in terms of what I wanted to get out of my life and realizing how fragile it is. I also had this realization while in the hospital that I never wanted to be laying in a hospital bed again, wondering if I would wake up the next day, right? And so the question then transformed into, well, why did I get a brain tumor in the first place, and how can I avoid it? And my neurosurgeon's response didn't really satisfy me. He basically said, well, the chances that you get a brain tumor are the same for anyone else. It's just like a random chance mutation. And that's just not very satisfying hearing something like that. Like I'm a doer, right? Like when I confront a challenge, I want to then do something to avoid that challenge, or at least to surmount that challenge. And so I did some research, and I started to look at my DNA. I did 23andMe. This was a long time ago. It's not full genome sequencing, but it was enough for me to then run it through these third-party analysis tools and look at specific SNPs or specific gene polymorphisms. And long story short, I found that there were specific genes that increased the likelihood of me having a brain tumor. Now, it wasn't something that would increase it by a crazy margin, but if the odds are 1 in 1,000, I may have been about 1 in 500. And that was somewhat satisfying for me to have done the research and found, okay, there is some explanation that we can point to that at least partially explains this experience. And going through that research process, it made me interested in doing more and more research. And so you're the doctor here. I'm personally not a doctor, but I'm sure you're aware of PubMed. And I spent a lot of time on PubMed, which is basically the US government has this website where they accumulate all of the scientific studies, and you can at least read the abstracts. And if it's a public study, you can then dig into the study. And whenever I was asking questions about health, I would go straight to PubMed rather than to like a magazine or a blog post or something. I would go to PubMed. And I came across a scientific study about 10 years ago called The Hallmarks of Aging, which is now considered a seminal piece in the field of longevity and aging. And that was the moment of epiphany. That is where so many of the things that I was looking at for almost 15 years and trying to understand about how I could extend my health span essentially crystallized. Because first of all, I came to realize that cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, glaucoma, diabetes, the list goes on. The number one risk factor for all of them is aging. Even more than cigarette smoke causes lung cancer, aging does. And then the second thing was that they identified the biological mechanisms or the causes of aging in the first place, and showed that in animal studies we could speed up aging and slow it down. So this is when I realized, oh, it's aging that I want to try to protect against or slow down if I can by targeting these mechanisms. And that is what's going to reduce the risk that I'm laying on a hospital bed in the future. So that's more or less my story. And that was about 10 years ago.
Nice. Yeah. I think that leads well. One thing that when I talk about aging, I think people recognize kind of in some way like what aging is, but I love breaking that up into kind of what are those hallmarks? What are the components that we're talking about? And like, let's get granular because when we say aging, everybody's like, it's this giant thing. But when you start to kind of do a dissection to it, it makes everything a little more digestible. You're like, actually, I can change that one, and I can change that one, and I can do some stuff that alters that. And it makes it like, well, actually, this isn't this big daunting task to change aging. Let's go through that a little bit. How do you think about the different components of aging? And maybe let's kind of go through what are those hallmarks.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you raise a good point. Like most people think of aging, and myself included, as just this inevitable aspect of life. You don't even question it. It's just this is part of life. And if you are to question it and you bring it up to people, they say, oh, it's like written in your genetic code, or God determines when you die. And it's actually not that simple. I mean, if we look historically, we used to die on average, the life expectancy was in our mid 30s up until we then invented sewage systems and then antibiotic use and statin drugs and chemotherapeutics and so on. All of these things have extended lifespans. So there, I don't take that as the answer, that it's just inevitable that you're going to die at a certain time or a higher powers determining when you die. I think there are things that we can do to extend our health span and our lifespan. So specifically those mechanisms, uh, we can go through them. There's 12 of them. But do you want to go through each one by one, or do you want me to just basically list them off and we can pick which ones we want to dissect?
Yeah, let's lay the 12 on them. Y'all
Okay,
can go back and write these down, but then let's just kind of we'll hit what you see as maybe the top 3 or 4 there.
sure. There's mitochondrial dysfunction. There's cellular senescence. There's loss of proteostasis. There's altered intercellular communication. There's genomic instability, also known as DNA damage. There's epigenetic alteration. So that's a really fascinating area to explore, is at the epigenome. There's telomere shortening. There's deregulated nutrient sensing. There's stem cell exhaustion. Most of us have at least heard of stem cells and their relation to aging. There's inflammaging. So it's not inflammation, it's a play on words. It's inflammaging. So as we age, there's this chronic low grade inflammation that actually gets larger and larger as we age. There's disabled autophagy, and there's dysbiosis that involves the microbiome. So, in terms of which ones to go over, I mean, we could go. Each of them is important. What's interesting is they all connect with each other. They all impact each other. It's a complex web. So if one is in a negative place, you're most likely going to put the other ones in a negative place as well. There's a reverberating effect, and so what's ideal is that you actually take care of all of them, and that's what the company I founded really focuses on, is to address all of them at once. But we can start with mitochondrial dysfunction just because it's a commonly known concept, the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the power plants of our cells. We inherit the mitochondria from our mothers, not from our fathers. And the mitochondria convert the foods that we eat into energy. So it takes that fat or those carbohydrates, and there's a process known as the Krebs cycle that actually breaks down those molecules into energy in the form of ATP, which is essentially the energy currency of our cells. So in order for our cells to do anything that they're supposed to do, it's not just movement, right? Energy is needed for us to think and for us to detoxify and for our heart to beat and everything. Our cells need this energy. And as we age, we have fewer mitochondria in our cells. And those that we do have are not as efficient or effective as they once were. Things like exercise are well known to stress the mitochondria in a good way, in a process known as hormesis, where those mitochondria come back stronger. So this is something commonly known in biology, where you put a little bit of a stressor on something, and then biology says, oh, I don't want to get damaged next time. So not only am I going to be able to get stronger to protect against that stress, I'm going to be even stronger so that I don't get damaged. And so that's this mitochondrial stress that exercise can induce.
Yeah, you've heard the whole like, comfort is the enemy of longevity kind of, there's a bunch of plays on that. Is it possible, this might be a weird question, like right off the bat, but is it possible for us to keep like healthy mitochondria, healthy inflammation, all those things without stepping into, some of those like areas of discomfort, such as exercise or temperature tolerance or, occasional fasting, some of those types of things? What do you think about that?
I would say that you need to stress the mitochondria for them to be healthy and in an ideal place. Now, the definition of stress, that is where there's a lot more nuance and discussion. So if we look at people living in the blue zones, who, a older lady living past 100 as a centenarian in Sardinia, Italy, for example, she's not running marathons. She's not doing triathlons. She's not bodybuilding. She's not doing any of those things, right? She might be carrying like some vegetables up a steep hill for, multiple times each day for practically her whole life. And she's getting her heart pumping. She's like stimulating her muscles and her mitochondria. And that's enough to keep her healthy. So there is something, you could overstress your muscles, you can overstress your mitochondria, you can overstress your body, and things like marathons going to say something controversial, marathons and triathlons, at least the Ironman distance triathlons, are probably causing excess inflammation, excess damage, and are not conducive to longevity. It's probably something a lot more moderate that it would be good for longevity. But if you're just sitting on the couch and you're not really exercising and stressing yourself, as you mentioned, with these different modalities, you're probably not going to have the positive effects when it comes to longevity.
Yeah, we talk about like almost, and I think everybody could kind of do this, like almost like using like the concept of periodization, where like there's times of your year where you are kind of like upticking your activity level to a higher level than you're comfortable with. That's going to change throughout life, right? And then there's times where you're kind of just like you're talking about the woman where you're kind of just staying active. I've told this story on the podcast, but you'll appreciate it. I was skiing in um, Colorado maybe 2 years ago, and I'm sitting on a ski lift, and the woman next to me, we're kind of fully dressed. I could tell she was a bit older, but I started talking to her about skiing, beautiful day, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm soaking up every day I can out here." She was like, "I'm 92, and I don't know how many ski seasons I have left." And I was like, "Wait," like I tell her what I do. We have however long you're on the ski lift, like 5 minutes. It's a 5 minute conversation, but it's stuck with me. She was like, at the end of every ski season, starting when I turned about 80, she was like, I put together what the hard things for me that ski season were, and I trained basically all off season as hard as I could. And then the month before ski season, I rest up and then I ski as many days as I can out here. And then she was like, and then ski season would end. And she was like, every time I was like, let me train so I can do one more and one more and one more. And she was like, I'm 92. And like, if I feel good at the end of this season, I'm gonna work on balance and leg strength and cardio. And then, I'll come back and, God willing, I'll do it again next year. And I was just like, she has built this beautiful little like periodization year because she's got this event she loves so much that she's willing to put in the discomfort in those little stages so that she can get to like the thing that she likes. I'm like, not all of us have something like that we like that much, that even at 85 she's probably out there sweating and kicking butt. But it was such a neat conversation, and then we get off and go our separate ways. But I was like, is that something that we need to be reaching towards?
Yeah, I mean, so the periodization is one thing, but I think you're highlighting another thing that's very important when it comes to longevity. It's the psychological aspect, and that is the passion and the purpose. She's got this purpose that is then provides the drive that she needs to then be physically engaged as she is. But there's also that I'm sure she's like full of excitement and optimism and looking forward to the future, like leading up to that ski season. And every day that she's skiing, she's probably in such a positive state of mind. And there's something to that as well, like positivity and optimism and purpose are definitely drivers of longer lives. And we see that in the research. When you compare optimists to pessimists, optimists live longer lives. And now that's partly based on decisions that they make, but it's also partly based on the biology of optimists and the difference between stress hormones, for example, of a pessimist and chronically elevating stress hormones like cortisol. When you're constantly stressed out, that can have negative downstream effects on our biology. As opposed to being optimistic, your cortisol levels are typically going to be lower.
Yeah, do you think that's the hardest one to um like maybe put a measure on? Is that kind of mission, excitement, the kind of social aspect of aging?
Uh, yeah, it's probably harder to put a measure on it just because a couple of reasons. One is it's not clearly objective data, and it's not like you could put like a a wristband on somebody or a ring and track like how social they're being.
Yeah.
Now, but you can try to objectify it. You could try to see like how many friends you have, how many friends did you interact with this week, how many social occasions did you have, and then rate those social occasions. So we can do it. But we also don't know exactly what's going on in the minds of the people and their psychology. And like, are they at the event, but they have social anxiety and they're actually really stressed out, or are they at the event and they're super happy? So, yeah, it is probably more difficult
Are
to
you
measure.
are you familiar with Jim Collins, like the Good to Great author?
I know the book, but not familiar with him specifically.
I heard him talk about how he does this. And so he started filling out a spreadsheet at the end of the day. And the spreadsheet would have like a one sentence thing of what he did today. Like, oh, I, did this in the morning, did this at lunch, had work, that like just very quick synopsis. And then it was a time percentage breakdown. I spent this much time doing like tasks, this much time doing creative work. He's an author, and this much time doing social activity. And then he would grade his day from like -2, terrible day, -1, not a good day, neutral day, +1 is a good day, +2 is like, this was a fantastic day. And he's been doing that every day for a few years. And he was like, the beautiful thing was I could sort by category now, and I can see, okay, let me go find all my +2 days. And like, what was my time breakdown that I did during those +2 days? Is there some consistency there? Did I spend, more time with family? Did I spend more time in creative work? What were the things that made that? And then can I go to my negative twos? Like, what made a terrible day? I was like, man, that is such a like a tiny little thing, but I've never heard somebody put it that way. That they were like, we're really bad as humans at predicting what we like what's going to make a good day for us. Because I've had many days where I wake up, I record a podcast, I'm writing, I see some patients. That sounds like a busy day, and I finish and I'm like, man, today was like an on purpose day, felt amazing. Like, I'm maybe not all the way a +2, but a +1.5. And then you have other days where you think it should be good. Hey, you're, sitting on a beach somewhere and you're like, yeah, that was good. I don't know if I accomplished a lot. And I'm sure this all kind of changes, but on that kind of like mental aspect of it, like, is there some little things we can put in our lives to at least give us some form of information? Because, if we don't have that part of it, I think that's one of those, like, it's like, that's the cog in the wheel. Like, if you do all these other things, I think of the Brian Johnson guy who's like, got the blueprint, and he's like a robot. And you're like, if you're doing all these things, but you're missing the relationship and the love and the connection, you're like, what did we accomplish?
Yeah, yeah, like him refusing to sleep in a bed with a partner because he wants to like maintain like a perfect score on his sleep. But meanwhile, he's not looking at the big picture. Like for example, what about all of the hormonal effects of being with a partner in bed, right? And the connection and the bonding and so on that is known to have positive effects on longevity. It's only looking at one part of the equation and not the more qualitative part of the equation, and how that qualitative component can really lead to better outcomes when it comes to longevity, but also quality of life, right?
Yeah.
Like, why extend quantity if we're not going to be mindful of quality of life?
Staying on kind of mitochondria, you mentioned exercise as a way to elevate mitochondrial health. What are some of the other kind of maybe lead components that can improve mitochondrial health and thereby kind of affect the aging process?
Sure. So there are specific supplements and ingredients, some of which are found in food, others are found just in human biology, but that they are found to have a positive effect on mitochondrial health. And these are some ingredients that we intentionally included in our flagship product at Novos. But those are things like, for example, pterostilbene. Pterostilbene, it starts with a PT. It's an odd spelling, but pterostilbene is sourced from, for example, blueberries. And they can have a mild stressing effect on mitochondria. But then back to that point about hormesis, it makes the mitochondria stronger. Another ingredient that's actually sourced from berries, but this time strawberries, is fisetin. Fisetin has been found to have positive effects on mitochondria. Something that's found in human biology and it declines with time, and it's also involved in that Krebs cycle, is alpha ketoglutarate. So alpha ketoglutarate is something that is found to power the mitochondria and their processes of creating energy. So those are just a few of the ingredients.
Nice. Yeah, I think where a lot of our listeners will be kind of familiar with mitochondria is in the healing process. If we can increase mitochondrial function, you have more energy to pull from to go through a repair process and healing process. So we'll use a lot of infrared photobiomodulation in the healing process, whether that's high intensity laser or kind of full body red light to increase that. And the interesting thing is, give us the 55 or 60-year-old who might be starting to have a little bit of mitochondrial dysfunction. And that person doing infrared or high intensity laser on an injury, it's like it's a rocket ship. They heal like a young person again. The young people heal fast already. You do it to them and they're like, yeah, I'm healing, it's great.
Yep.
But when you increase that uptick where there's been a little slowing, they feel the difference to a pretty high degree.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's another way to fuel mitochondria, especially is the near infrared spectrum. I think it's like 670 and 720 nanometers, if I remember correctly. But those spectrum can have a positive effect on mitochondria and their energy production, essentially.
Can you what's an easy way for somebody, if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to know how well my mitochondria function. What's the measure of that? How do you test for that?
Good question. I don't know if there's a way to test it in vivo or ex vivo. I'm sure ex vivo you can. So ex vivo would be like taking like a tissue sample from a human and then seeing how the mitochondria are, like maybe how many mitochondria there are in that tissue sample and so on. So that is probably the best way, but that's invasive. So that's not a practical way for us to do it. And in vitro, so in a cell culture, we can easily test it and be able to see the effects of different ingredients or light spectrums and so on, and their effects on the mitochondria. But in terms of in vivo in a human, I mean, for one thing, I mean, perhaps just seeing exercise performance and or metabolism is probably at least a surrogate marker, a correlate of mitochondrial function. But I don't know if there's a direct measurement of in vivo in humans that is.
Yeah, I don't either. We've piqued my curiosity. I'll dig into that after we finish. I don't know about that, but I think your point is very clear. Like when we look at the research around like VO2 max and aging and strength and aging, like there's just this monster change if you have great cardiovascular function, cardiorespiratory function as measured on VO2 max. Like, a lot of people have been talking about this over the last, 5 years, but in the science community, it's like, we've known this answer for 25, 30 years that, yeah, that's a bigger predictor of all-cause mortality. I think there was a study that came out in the 80s, if I remember correctly, that showed that that was a bigger predictor than like blood pressure, surgical history. He went through a bunch of things. So it's interesting that it has hit now, but you're going to have a really tough time having a high VO2 max if your mitochondria aren't functioning well. So as a proxy, it's like if you're strong and you have a high VO2 max, you have good mitochondrial health. And so it makes sense that those have such a big mover in terms of health and aging and predictive value. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I mean by surrogate marker. So yeah, something like VO2 max is probably going to be able to give you an idea of how well your mitochondria are functioning.
What are I know we kind of completely like derailed our thing. Let's do like the inflammaging thing because I think that would be an interesting thing for people to kind of at least understand the components there. And I'd love to get into some of the other like biomarkers and tests that y'all have looked at that you looked at along the way. Some of the DNA and kind of epigenetic tests that are out there.
Sure.
But let's go into
Sure.
inflammaging.
So inflammaging, as I was alluding to earlier, it's this idea that as we age, there's an increase in inflammation. So when we're young, it might be this like very quiet hum that you hardly even hear if we're using an analogy. And as we age, it starts to get louder and louder and louder until it's eventually practically deafening when you're closer to the end of your life. And it's this chronic, initially low grade, but growing inflammation that can then cause damage to to cells and by extension tissues and organs, and then all of these other mechanisms of aging start to decline as well. Now, what are the things that can cause inflammation? There are um, exogenous factors that can cause the inflammation, and there are endogenous factors. So, exogenous factors outside of the body, it can be, for example, the foods you eat that can be highly inflammatory, like trans fats, for example, and tons of sugar, etc. You could have excess UV exposure. The dose makes a poison, and a very, very small dosage can be good for us in terms of vitamin D production and melanin production and nitric oxide that can come from UV and so on. But it's easy to go beyond that because keep in mind UV exposure causes DNA damage, another mechanism of aging, genomic instability. But our bodies are equipped with the tools to be able to repair that DNA damage as long as it's a small amount. If it's a large amount, our bodies can't keep up with it. And that's where things like cancers take place and they metastasize. So, those are a couple of examples of exogenous factors that can lead to inflammation. Endogenous factors can be uh, for example, I mentioned before excess stress and cortisol, and this chronic level of high cortisol can lead to cellular inflammation that can take place. Um, there are other mechanisms of aging that can lead to inflammation. So, take, for example, cellular senescence. So, cellular senescence is this idea that cells can turn into a zombie like state. And when they turn into this zombie state, they secrete inflammatory molecules known as a SASP, SASP. Um, and it stands for senescence associated secretory phenotype. It's a detail, but in case your audience is curious what SASP means. And so these zombie cells, they accumulate for different reasons. Like, for example, one is it could have been a cancerous cell and the body kind of just turns off that cell, but is having trouble removing it. So it kind of flies under the radar of the immune system to remove it through a process known as autophagy, which is another mechanism of aging. So it flies under the radar. And these these senescent cells are releasing the SASP, causing damage to nearby cells as well. And so this increases the inflammation of those nearby cells. It increases the likelihood that those cells turn senescent, and the whole process becomes exponential as we age. It's one of the reasons why our skin wrinkles, for example, is because of senescent cells that start to accumulate in our skin. So that's an example of an endogenous process that can lead to inflammation.
Yeah, and that gets to where it's like this is all a feedback loop to me. It's like, if you have the negative kind of loop going where you have inflammation, inflammation causes cells not to function real well, that increases the likelihood of cellular senescence, that increases inflammation, that increases DNA damage, and now we're like there. That sounds terrible, but there's also the flip side. Like there's also the positive loop, which is like when I reduce inflammation or I clean up senescent cells, like I can tap into this positive feedback loop, if you will, where me making a change to one of those systems actually has ripple effects that improves the function of, multiple or all of those systems.
Yes, exactly. And that's what my vision was for my company Novos when I had the idea for it back in 2018. It was after consulting with a lot of scientists in the field, world-renowned scientists at Harvard Medical School and MIT and the Salk Institute, who they specialize in longevity and these mechanisms of aging. Eventually, the conversations evolved to my question of why isn't anyone targeting all of these mechanisms at the same time? And the answer is that if it's a scientist in academia, they specialize in a specific mechanism or two. And if it's a biotech or pharma, which are the only entities that were involved in this level of sophistication of addressing aging, they need to create a drug that addresses a specific medical condition, medical indication. And so, in other words, they need to address a disease for FDA or EFSA in Europe approval and for insurance reimbursement. And that's where the money comes from. So nobody was financially motivated to be targeting all of them at the same time. But it was obvious to me that that would be the best way to address it. And the scientists agreed unanimously. If you really want to put a dent in the aging process, you need to address all of them at once because of what we discussed about how they synergize with each other. So, my company Novos, we became the first company in the world to take this approach of addressing all of the mechanisms of aging simultaneously. And then we did a number of scientific studies to just prove out that we are actually effectively impacting the mechanisms, but also effectively impacting the aging process as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you're only going to be as healthy as the lowest performing system, right? I mean, that probably goes back to what we were talking about before with like kind of emotional and mental health. Like, if that's not healthy, nothing else is healthy. Like, we've got to elevate that kind of lowest rung to really make the dent. Because if you're doing great on 10 and terrible on 2, you didn't accomplish anything most likely, and that's going to move the needle anyway.
Yeah. I would say that if you improve any one of them, you're going to overall improve your health in one way or another. But to have the most significant impact, you need to be mindful of all of them and have a positive effect on all of them.
What do you think is um, the best we can do in today's age? Like, I've heard you talk about like kind of altering it by, I think 37% is what the metrics have shown for you. What do you think the best is? What can we accomplish if we do a lot right? And what does that mean in years for most people?
Yeah, so I want to be clear, first of all, like if anybody tells you that they're reversing aging, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're being dishonest. We can't reverse aging. And so when we talk about the idea of like reducing biological age, it doesn't mean that you're literally reversing our age. And we can talk about what it actually does mean if you'd like to. What we can do is we can slow down the process of aging. That is something that is feasible. We show it in animal studies and we can show it in humans. And here's a quick example that I think will make it seem that much more realistic to people and attainable. If you are, if you take two twins, for example, they have the same genetics, and you give one of them a very unhealthy diet, you tell them to sit on the couch all day long, smoke a pack of cigarettes, and drink a handle of whiskey every day. How fast do you think they're going to age in every sense? Not simply the chances of disease, that is an offshoot of the aging process, as we discussed at the beginning, but just even how they visually age. If you took a picture of them after 5 years or 10 years of doing that. Now compare that to the other twin who, let's just say we give them a healthy diet, largely plant-based with healthy fish and, low, relatively low on some of the sugars and unhealthy substances and so on. They're physically active, but not overly active, but also not sitting on the couch all day. They abstain from alcohol, or at least they do so. They abstain from regularly drinking and binge drinking, and they don't smoke. If you took photographs of each of them after 10 years, one is going to look probably about 6, 7 years older than the other one. And you can guess which one that is, right? Because you actually have accelerated their aging process. And so when people say, "Oh, it's the genetics that determine how long you age, or how well you age and how long you live," there are scientists that have analyzed that, and they found that it's between 10 to 30% genetics. There are different factors that determine for whom it's going to be more genetics than others, but it's actually about 70 to 90% lifestyle and environment that dictate how fast or slow you're aging. So there are ways that we can actually speed up and slow down aging. And there's actually tools that exist for us to try to measure the rate at which you're aging. And that gets into the topic of epigenetic tests. You mentioned the word before. And some of your listeners might remember when I went through the list of the biological causes of aging, one of them was epigenetic alterations. So the epigenome is this layer that sits on top of your genes. So if you think of your genes as piano keys, your epigenome would be which keys are being played. And you can imagine, like when you're young, it's like it's a beautiful song being played. Let's just say it's Tchaikovsky being played right on the piano. And then as you age, certain keys get mispressed. Other keys that should be pressed are not. Sometimes you press a key too hard, and other times you don't press it hard enough, because your genes are not an on-off switch. It's more like a dimmer switch. And so that's analogous to what happens to us as we age. Certain genes turn on that shouldn't, other genes turn off that shouldn't. And there are patterns that emerge from this. Now, those genes that turn off that shouldn't can have a negative effect, because maybe it was an anti-inflammatory gene that turned off. And maybe it's a pro-inflammatory gene that was turned on. So that can have a direct impact on the aging process. But when it comes to tracking your aging and how fast or slow you're aging, we can also, scientists have been able to build algorithms that can look at specific genes and see, oh, for faster aging people, these are the genes that are turned on and turned off. And for slower aging people, these are the genes that are turned on and off. And we can basically tell you with a very simple blood sample, like the size of a nickel, that much blood, we can tell you, Derek, you are aging 20% slower than the average person right now. Or maybe you had a really unhealthy lifestyle and a lot of stress over the last 6 months, and now you're aging like 10% faster than the average person. So we can track this and give you an objective number that's indicative of your lifestyle and your genes, but your genes are a much smaller factor. As I said before, it's mainly your lifestyle and your environment.
Yeah, I love that. I think that gives people power to this. Like when you ask people like, "Hey, do you want to live to 100?" A lot of people that I've talked to that are in there, let's say, 55 and above, are like, "No,
Yeah.
I don't want to." I'm like, because you think that you don't have control over how you're going to feel when you get there. Like they think
Yes.
that means I'm going to be hurting worse than I am now, and it's going to be hard to do everything. And like, we've got this pre-existing view of what that means in people who function at that. Maybe we remember our, parents who are, getting out of breath, getting up and stuff. And you're like, no, I don't want that. You're like, well, what if you feel like you feel now?
If you feel like the way you feel now, and you are 99 years old, and someone says, "Do you want to live another year, or do you want to die today?"
Yeah.
Everyone would say, "I want to live another year." If you're feeling good, if you're in a good state of mind, and you don't have any crazy pain, and you're physically capable and so on, everyone wants to live longer. They want to see their grandchildren, or in that case, great great grandchildren, growing up. They want to experience the world. They want to still be connected with their loved ones and their friends. It's only when things are very painful or you're very sick and debilitated that people start to be pessimistic about their future.
How often do you think people should do like an epigenetic test like that? Is yearly a good frequency? Does it need to be more than that, less than that, to actually like kind of use it as a tracking
Yeah.
mechanism?
So I'm mindful of people's budgets, and being mindful of a budget, I say once a year is a good amount. And it would be easy to say do it once every 3 months, and some people do say once every 3 months. But I think it becomes too expensive. It ends up being well more than $1,000 a year to do that. And the tests, like we offer one that is considered the most accurate and precise of the tests available. It's called the Novos age test. It's $349 for one test, or $299 per test if you buy two of them. So most people don't want to spend more than $1,000 a year on these tests. And so I would say that if you do it once a year, the benefit of that is that you can also account for a confounding factor, specifically seasonality. So imagine that you do your epigenetic test January 1st. Your lifestyle is very different on January 1st than it is on July 1st, right? I mean, in terms of time outdoors and your stress levels and alcohol intake and the foods that you eat and stress levels, everything is very different at that time of year, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to try to minimize the confounding factor, because you might get a false signal where your aging either speeds up or slows down, and it's actually just based on like that time of year and how you're living your life. And the changes that you made that you're trying to track are not really having enough of an impact for you to really see the needle move if you're doing it at a different time of year. So I think once a year is a great idea. Now, some people are get anxious, like they've added supplements, they've started exercising, they've reduced their caloric intake, and now they're eating healthy foods, and they just want to know right away, like, what kind of impact does this make? So for them, I'd say like 6 months after you've been strict with these changes in your life, then you can do it. But just keep in mind what your lifestyle was like when you first tested and the season that you were in. And then consider even things like UV rays and the time that you spend outdoors and so on can actually have an impact compared to being in the cold winter, for example, indoors all day.
Yeah, that would, I think, be my question is like, how far into a new routine do we even expect that to show the change?
We start to see signals after as little as about 3 months, but to really see a significant change. I mean, we did, for example, a case study. We had people, they measured their biological rate of aging and their biological age and so on when we started the study. And then we gave them two of our products, Novoscore and Novosboost, for 6 months. And we tested after 3 months, and there was no signal yet. There was a lot of noise. And then we tested again after 6 months. And at 6 months, that's when we saw the signal. And we saw that nearly three quarters, 73% of the participants reduced their biological rate of aging by the equivalent of 1 month per year. And 0%, so the remaining 27%, 0% accelerated aging. So that hints to us that people who would have sped up their aging were actually protected in some way from our formulation. That's what we believe is probably the case. And then for the other people who maintained their lifestyle and there wasn't that much of a fluctuation, we slowed it down to the equivalent of a month per year. And so we like to think, at least internally, like, what would you do with an extra month of life per year? That's essentially what this potentially could lead to if the epigenetic pace of aging actually pans out that way.
Yeah, love that. If people are going through that, what's the so you get the aging test. I imagine we've talked about tons of tests on here in terms of micronutrients and blood tests, everything that genetic tests. I don't know if we've ever talked about people doing an aging test. So they do that. Is it a finger prick? And then like what's the education after? What's the understanding of those results?
Yeah, so it's a simple finger prick. You put it on an index card, and it's about the size of a nickel, the amount of blood that you need to fill on the index card. You mail it in within about 1 month of the lab's receipt of your sample. You'll then receive your results. There are three results. The first result is your biological pace of aging. This is based on the Dunedin pace clock. that was created by researchers at Columbia University and Duke University. It's considered the most accurate and precise of any biological age clock out there. And that's why we chose it. And that's what we emphasize for our test. That's what people should pay the most attention to, especially because that's something that can change based on lifestyle. And it seems to be the most accurate of all of the tests out there for a number of reasons. For example, caloric restriction, reducing your caloric intake, is known to extend lifespan in all animal species and is believed to do so in humans as well. Other biological age tests, even ones that are well respected, do not respond to caloric restriction in terms of reducing biological age, but the Dunedin pace clock does. So it seems like it picks up the signal from the proper stimuli or interventions that other clocks are not. So it's extremely accurate. It's very precise, meaning that each time you do let's just say you run the test twice with the same blood sample, precision would be is how close are the two results to each other, right? And there's actually a measure for this known as ICC, and the ICC for this test is above 0.97. Most clocks don't even report their ICC because it's not particularly good, and they don't want to share that. So it's very accurate. The second test is the biological age test. So this is going to give an actual number. So let's just say you're 30 or 40 years old. Let's just say 40 years old chronologically. Maybe biologically, you're the equivalent of someone who's 44, or you're the equivalent of someone who's 36 or 37. That's the second output. That is less accurate, admittedly, than the pace of aging. So we emphasize the pace of aging, and that's really the trajectory on which you're aging going into the future. We are working on integrating a newer clock for biological age that is a brand new clock that is more accurate, but that's going to take some time before that's integrated. And then the third result is telomere length. So I mentioned in terms of the biological causes or mechanisms of aging, something called telomere shortening. So your telomeres are the end caps of your chromosomes, and your chromosomes contain your DNA. So think of a telomere like the end of a shoelace, and all of the threads in your shoelace as like your DNA. And every time there's a cellular division, your telomeres get a little bit shorter. And why are cells dividing? Well, one of the reasons why they're dividing is because they get damaged. So DNA damage, for example, and the cell not functioning properly, or excess inflammation and the cell's not functioning properly. So the body says, all right, we need to get rid of this cell and produce a new one. And that's where stem cells come in. So a new one is produced. So people who are living unhealthy lives with a lot of excess inflammation and damage and so on, they're going to shorten their telomeres more and more and more, that much more rapidly than someone who's living a healthy life. And the issue with telomeres is that if they get too short, you have a higher risk of morbidity, especially diseases like gastrointestinal cancers, for example. And so this is more of a check off the box metric. You want to make sure for your chronological age that you're not at too low of a percentile. You don't want to be like in the 20th percentile or below. That means that your telomeres are very short for your chronological age. You want to try to be in one of the higher percentiles. And so that's another output from this test that we provide.
Yeah, I love that. I think the metrics probably give you a very good measuring tool. As you're saying that, I'm like, okay, if I get this and it says, hey, you're 44, what do I do with that? Like, I almost feel like, what's the test that tells me here's where your issues are. Here's what you need to clean up in terms of like what system, if we move the needle on it, when you test this next year, you're going to test 39.
Great question. So what we output is at this point in time is a PDF that gives recommendations for things that have been shown in scientific literature to slow down the pace of aging. But we want it to be even more personalized than that. So we launched a mobile app just a couple of months ago. It's completely free to use, so your audience can use this whether they buy our biological age test or not. And you fill out some questionnaires, and it takes about 10 minutes to complete. And we provide personalized recommendations for you based on the scientific literature of what has been shown to extend health span, lifespan, and slow down aging. And we can say, Derek, here are the six like high importance things for you to focus on. Here are the 12 moderate important things for you to focus on. And here are the 30 things that you're doing fantastically well. And we can even show you your percentile compared to the community. Like, how well are you living your life? How well do you fare compared to other people in the community? And each recommendation is accompanied by a scientifically referenced article. So you can, within the app, read the article about that topic and learn why are we recommending it to you. And then, perhaps most importantly, we then create daily actions for you. So let's just say we recommend that you stand more. You're sitting at a desk too long. And that's the case for so many white collar workers like myself. We just sit too much. All right, well, how are we going to get you to stand up more? Well, there's different daily actions you can take. Maybe it is setting a timer on your phone, 60 minutes, every 60 minutes that you just stand up for 60 seconds and walk around the room before you come back. Maybe it's purchasing a standing desk, and we can link to some affordable options on Amazon. There's different steps that you can take, or you can create your own custom daily action, something that you feel like is a small enough bite to bite off or to chew for you to then start working towards that recommendation. So that's the first feature of the app. And it looks like you want to say something, so I'll let you, but then I can tell you about some other
stuff.
features, other features within the app as well I can tell you about.
Yeah, this is the good stuff. Before we do that, what are I get excited whenever you're starting to get like mass data where you get a bunch of people filling stuff out and you start to say like, look, 80% of people need to stand more when we've looked at this. Like, okay, so on that front, what are the top maybe like 3 or 4 recommendations that y'all see? Like most of the people listening to this would need to know, hey, more than likely you need to do these couple of things to change your aging profile.
That's a great question. So since we only have about 2 months of data, we haven't like thoroughly analyzed it. When we were first setting it up, and we were getting the initial intake of users, one that comes to mind is that people had inadequate fatty fish consumption, things like salmon, or supplementing with omega-3 as an alternative if they weren't going to eat the fatty fish. Another, when it comes to diet, was most people just don't eat their veggies. They just don't have enough vegetables in their diet. And this is including, keep in mind, this is including a segment of like, there's a biased sample set. In other words, people using our app are motivated to try to be healthy and are interested in longevity. So these are already people who are apparently healthier than the average person in most cases. And even they are not having enough when it comes to the vegetables. So those are the first things that come to mind for diet. But it's a great question. I think at this point we've got thousands of people using the app. It's a good time for us to start digging in, and I can get back to you with a more precise answer on that.
What would be some of the other big movers that might fall on that recommendation list? If we're looking at kind of a, hey, here's your, 5 to 6 big things that you can do. You talked about kind of, improving nutrition, but what else falls on that list?
Sure. So I'll give the high level categories of which your audience is probably familiar. But what's key about the app is that we get very granular about things. So I'll give you an example of a granular recommendation. Flossing your teeth. Most people don't think that oral hygiene is going to have an impact on anything beyond just their oral health. But actually, it's been found that if you don't have adequate oral hygiene, including things like brushing twice a day and flossing at least once a day, you increase the risk for heart disease and Alzheimer's. And that's because the bad bacteria that will flourish in your mouth, you're swallowing constantly throughout the day. It makes its way into your gut. And a lot of those escape your gut and make their way eventually into your bloodstream. And those inflammatory bacteria can then cause inflammation in places like your heart and your brain. Back to that point about inflammation. And so it's all connected. So that's an example of something very particular that the app will be able to make you aware of. So in each of these broad categories, to get to your question, there are these more granular, nuanced recommendations. Um, Diet is one. And when it comes to diet, it's not only what you eat, but how much of it you eat and when you eat it, right? So the timing of your meals, if you're doing things like intermittent fasting, or time restricted feeding is actually a more accurate term for it, or you are fasting, prolonged fasting, like these are different factors involved in when you think of food intake. Another is activity, obviously, but equally as important to the activity itself is the rest period, which I kind of spoke to at the beginning about marathons versus, the woman walking up the steep hills in Sardinia. Uh, Another factor is sleep. So this is an extension of recovery, but sleep, not just quantity, but quality of sleep, and getting, the REM stages and the deep sleep stages, and feeling good and refreshed in the morning. And ideally, I, for example, don't wake up with an alarm clock. I have an alarm clock as a failsafe, but I typically wake up 5 to 10 minutes before the alarm would go off. And that's because, first of all, I have entrained a very strong circadian rhythm. And second, because I have slept enough. And if you're waking up groggy and hitting snooze every morning, that means you are not sleeping enough. And I recommend to those people that they go to bed 30 minutes earlier each night, every night, until they get to the point where they're not hitting snooze anymore. And then they have pretty much found the point at which they need to go to bed each night. Maybe they can go to bed a little bit later than that because they were making up for lost sleep, but you're approximating now like how much sleep you actually need. Another is more the psychological and social aspects of things. So this is trying to minimize your stress to the degree that you can. The degree that you can't, then stress management. And this is where things like mindfulness or meditation and just like having the right perspectives on these stressors are very helpful. For me, something that I found to be very helpful is, as I mentioned earlier, like I had a brain tumor. I also lost my mother to cancer, and these are some of the most traumatic events in my life. I also had a business that failed and went bankrupt, and so on. So like these are like pivotal moments in my life. And when I look at a stressor, I always look back at those events and say, like, does this compare to those other stressors I had? The answer is no. And then the second question is, did I get over those stressors, and did I smile again and have an amazing life after those stressors kind of settled down? And the answer was yes. So when I look at it in comparison, I can always calm down somewhat. Otherwise, I just go to my dog and give her a big hug, and that also calms me down as well. So the psychology, it's relationships. You want to have the magic number is 3 strong friendships that are positive, constructive friendships, not negative, toxic relationships. That is the number that is found to be associated, at least, with people who are in better health and associated with better longevity. And then I would consider supplements and prescription drugs. So there are some prescription drugs, like this is no advice about, your specific condition, talk to your doctor, but there's some prescription drugs that could be potentially harmful or are just masking an underlying issue, and you are not addressing the underlying cause. And that's what's most important for you to try to do. There are some prescription drugs that are found to potentially extend lifespan and health span, which we can talk about if you care to. And then there are supplements, the same thing. Just because something is good for you in the short term for a specific goal like weight loss or focus and concentration or libido or skin doesn't mean it's good for you in the long term. So there's certain supplements that are good for longevity and others that are not. So it's just like prescription drugs in that regard.
Yeah, that's you did a wonderful job of dissecting, I think, some of the major areas of kind of aging and really overall health, right? We kind of use aging as a proxy here, but those things, if you do those things well, you're going to be healthier to function day to day, whether you're worried about living longer or not. You're going to live better if we improve some of those things. What would be, and I might be trying to like hone this down too narrow, and that's fine. Like of those things, like each one probably has like there could potentially be 10 supplements to add to somebody's life, and maybe, a few psychological or social things, sleep, different exercise or activity or training, certainly diet things. What do you think are probably the leading kind of couple of activities or changes people make that give the most bang for their buck? You talked about fasting,
Mhm.
and changing that. Um, I think of that as kind of one of these like, major kind of lead dominoes that if people put that one in their life a few times a year to clean up cell damage and inflammation and get into autophagy and clear that up, that moves the needle a pretty good amount. What are things that come to mind for you? Whether that's a couple of supplements that people really need to know about, a couple of activities, what's the couple of granular things that really move the needle for you?
Yeah. So I'd say my first more precise answer is that it depends on the individual, because we each have different strengths and weaknesses. And what is the most impactful for me is going to be different than what's the most impactful for, say, a 60-year-old woman who's 30 pounds overweight. And so I'll give an example of that. So I do agree that fasting is fantastic approach for longevity. That fasting is going to be more impactful for that woman who's 30 pounds overweight than it will be for me. Why? Well, I have low body fat percentage. I'm very physically active. I do a lot of cardio and weightlifting. And so the benefits when it comes to autophagy and cellular cleanup and so on, and not overindulging and stimulating growth pathways like mTOR excessively, and wanting to stimulate a nutrient signaling pathway like AMP kinase. I'm already doing all of those things from my lifestyle. The person who's 30 pounds overweight, who's not that physically active, is not. And so the fasting is going to have a much greater impact on that person than me. For me, I'm sitting too much. And so now I've gotten to the point where I'm standing on the island in my kitchen more and more, and I'm bringing my laptop there and I'm working from there. And so that's like one of the recommendations the app gave me. And I'm integrating it. And that's probably going to make a bigger impact for me and my long term health than some things that would be commonly referred to. Now, if we just speak in generalities, and just like the average American, I would say that yes, fasting is fantastic. I would say time restricted feeding is fantastic. And whether that is because people just end up eating fewer calories when you narrow that eating window, or if it's because of other biological processes, that's still to be determined, I would say, largely when it comes to the research. But either way, we know it helps people with their health. So try to eat, for example, only between 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Or ideally, you actually go even earlier, like maybe it's like 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then don't eat after that. And make sure you get all of the calories you need to be able to sleep well that night within that eating window. Of course, try to incorporate more vegetables into your diet. Eliminate processed foods and eat things that come from the earth. Initially, it's going to be more challenging for people who have been eating processed foods. But what I tell my friends and loved ones is that if you can make it past 3 weeks, it becomes significantly easier. And part of the reason of that for that is psychological. Like you start to enjoy the flavors and the taste of these other foods. And we actually see that. Like if you're eating hyper palatable foods like candies, um, nothing else tastes particularly sweet. And if you eliminate that, like when I experimented with a ketogenic diet at different points in my life, I found like carrots tasted so sweet, right? Like
Yeah.
who really thinks of a regular carrot tasting sweet? But when you eliminate all these other foods, they start to taste differently, right? And you appreciate the flavors more. But also your microbiome is changing. And so if you've got bacteria in your gut that is craving sugars, they're going to, through the gut brain axis, they're going to start signaling we want more sugar to fuel us, otherwise we're going to die. So they're going to help make you crave that food. Eventually they do start to die off, and what's going to take their place? Well, bacteria that's craving this healthier food that you're eating, like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and whatever it might be. And so they start to take up that real estate in your gut. And after about 3 weeks, that's when I find most people find it's much easier to maintain that diet.
Yeah, I think that hits. We do a fasting mimicking diet for patients who kind of fall into the category that you're talking about. A bit of excess weight, a bit of inflammation. There's a few other factors that will do it. And after that, almost all of them are like, you know what I crave? People are like, you must want a pizza or a steak. They're like, I want a fresh, like crisp salad with like good ingredients and like just oh, that sounds amazing. It's like
Avocado and balsamic
like
vinegar and
yeah, that like
salmon. Yeah.
that you're like that's in you. And I've probably done 35-day fasts in different forms. And it's almost the same every time. It's like I fall into that category of like I want fresh. There's something in the change in the biome, and it's almost got to be that because logically, if you've been eating like kind of soups and kind of nut bars and stuff for 5 days, you would think like give me that pizza or whatever it is, but that's not what your body tells you at that point. Your body's like, I don't want that. I feel good right now. I feel clean. I feel light. Don't give me that. That actually kind of like thinking of a donut. You're like, I don't know. I don't want that in there. So it's a really interesting reset that happens. And then if you can keep that going, I've had so many people that hit that third week. They do a reset, and then I'm like, look, these next 2 weeks, I want you to really try and walk the line. And if they can hit that, I've had so many people say like, I broke my sugar addiction, or I drank whatever. I drank a 7 Up every evening, and I did the reset, the little fast 5-day fast, and then I did 2 weeks without it, and now I'm like, I don't need that.
Yep.
That doesn't even enter my mind. So I think you're right on with where that starts to really kind of change even deeper than just kind of the psychological part of it.
Yes. And what's, I think, equally as important is for people to realize that if you then have a small failure along the way, that you should not give up. Like 4th of July comes, or you're at someone's home and you see a cookie and everyone's raving about it and you try it. And then you don't fall down a slippery slope of, oh, I just ruined it, so let me just have more cookies. And no, like, all right, you have one day where you slipped. And it's like you've taken 100 steps forward and you took one step backwards. You can now get back on that streak of taking another 100 steps forward. And so like every so often, in fact, I'm at the point where like practically once a week, I'll have foods that I crave. Like I'll go out to an Italian restaurant and have some pasta, or I'll have pizza, or someone at the table gets dessert and I'll share it with them. And like, so I'm not super strict and religious about it. During the work days where I have a routine, it becomes far easier for me to just maintain that super healthy diet on my work day. So basically Sunday night until Friday afternoon, I am eating a practically perfectly clean diet. But then on the weekend, you live a little and you go to a restaurant and you try some things on other people's plates, or you get that pasta. But when I do it, I always make sure that I'm getting something healthy with that meal. So for example, if I'm going to have some pasta, I make sure I get a bowl of spinach, and I'm getting that healthy food with it. I'm getting meat as well. Ideally, I'm timing that meat before I'm having the pasta, which will slow the absorption of those carbs. So these little tiny tweaks that I'll make. And I don't do it all at once, like I'll get the pasta and the dessert and all of these things all at one meal, because that's going to spike your blood glucose to the heavens. And if you haven't been eating that way, it's going to be that much more impactful. Your body's not ready to release that much insulin. So I prefer to kind of spread it out a little bit across different meals.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Really, really good. I think that's probably A very helpful tip. Don't let the one thing kind of completely derail you. Let's do a
Yeah.
quick section, Chris, on movement and kind of activity that moves the needle here. What would be kind of some good recommendations? Somebody listening to this, they're like, look, I'm doing a few of these things right. I've started cleaning this up. I think my low hanging fruit, if I look at this, is that I'm sitting, I'm not doing any exercise. What would be some of the initial kind of recommendations on improving that part of the aging process?
21 minutes a day. That's the magic number. So there's this concept known as the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. How do you get 80% of the benefits um, by only investing 20% of the effort? So 21 minutes a day is what researchers have found of, for example, brisk walking, whatever it takes to get your heart rate up so that it's a little bit of a labored breathing. You can still talk, but you're feeling your heart is speeding up and it's a little bit harder. And so if somebody is obese, it might just be walking. If somebody is fit, it might be a very brisk walk. And if someone is exceptional shape, it might be a jog or even a run for some people. But it's 21 minutes per day that is found to get, if I recall correctly, about 60% of the benefits of physical activity. And 21 minutes is really not that much, right? I mean, you go out to walk to a local shop or a supermarket, or you park your car and you walk around a shopping mall or something. I mean, you can easily hit that 21 minutes, especially if you talk to someone on the phone while you do it, or you listen to a podcast. You have something to distract you and keep you occupied. 21 minutes is nothing. And so I would start there. Just get moving, physically active, and ideally do it first thing in the morning. Go outside, get some sun in your eyes and your retina, and that will help to entrain that circadian rhythm that I mentioned earlier. And it will also just make you that much more energized to start your day. And that's where I would start. Then, of course, ideally, people are also doing some resistance training, whether it be weightlifting or calisthenics or body weight movements. So maybe doing some body weight squats just to start. If you're not particularly strong yet, that's a great place to start. You can then start adding some weights, and you don't even need to go out and buy weights at first. Maybe you just carry like 2 gallons of water in each arm and you do those squats or something, right? Like you're just adding a little bit of more resistance. Or you can get resistance bands, right? And it's these like giant rubber bands that you step on, and you can now add some resistance that way. Work your way up, particularly, especially if you're older. And I would say even starting in your 40s, but especially if you're older than that, you want to have strong, stable legs because you don't want to slip and fall. If you slip and fall, of course, that could potentially lead to a concussion or even death. But perhaps more importantly, more people don't actually die from the slip and fall. It's that they're debilitated and they're put into a wheelchair. And if you're 60 or 70 or 80 years old and you're in a wheelchair, the chances that you recover are like go down because it takes much longer for you to recover. And then imagine all of the muscle atrophy that takes place and sarcopenia potentially. So you're losing a lot of muscle while in the wheelchair. For you to regain that muscle is very difficult. And the chances that you fall again thereafter, it's just a very negative cycle that can take place. So you want to build that foundation of strong legs. And of course, the rest of your body would be great. Pushing yourself to increase VO2 max, like you mentioned earlier, would be great. But if we're talking about the minimum effective dose, it's the 21 minutes of walking and ideally some body weight training, push-ups and body weight squats and so on.
Yeah, that I think there was a study that was done where they had people didn't change anything. They made them do half of that even, and I think it was 11 minutes a day of them taking a walk in the morning, and it increased lifespan by 2 years. And it was like, don't touch anything, go walk for 11 minutes. And I was like, that's very specific. I don't know how they came up with that. 2 years from an 11-minute walk in the morning. You're like, all right, yeah, that kind of carries to that the 80-20.
Yeah.
Big fan of that. I lied to you. I know we mentioned Terra still being in some of the other ones. Are there a couple of other kind of supplements that seem to be quite prevalent in y'all's program?
Yeah. Well, so So I mentioned earlier that we created the first formula to address all of the 12 mechanisms of aging. So that specifically is this product called Novoscore. We have three products, but Novoscore is our foundational product. It has 12 ingredients in it. So instead of taking more than um, 15 pills per day, we have it as this drink mix. You tear it open, you put it in your water. We have an orange flavored version, naturally sweetened with stevia, no calories, or an unflavored version that you would mix into a smoothie or a juice. It has a little bit of a taste, so you want to put it into something flavored, but that doesn't have any stevia. And this we have studied and found, for example, that in vitro studies with human cells, we could reduce DNA damage from irradiation, think things like the sun, by as much as 77%, more than any other substance this lab had ever tested with $7 million worth of studies prior to us. We reduce DNA damage from chemotherapeutics. Normally, DNA can have double strand breaks, which is like mutilation of the DNA, and we reduce that significantly. We've shown that we reduce cellular senescence by the same amount as the prescription longevity drug rapamycin. Well, rapamycin is technically an immunomodulator for organ transplants, but it's been found to be the gold standard that all researchers compare interventions to because it has extended lifespan in every species ever studied. That is the standard. And we reduce cellular senescence by the same amount as rapamycin. We reduce a process called oxytocin ferroptosis, which is associated with Alzheimer's, dementia, and certain forms of cancer. That was done at the Salk Institute in California. We reduce cellular inflammation. These are all studies done on this product. And then we also showed that we could slow down the rate of aging I mentioned earlier by the equivalent of 1 month per year by taking this along with a product called Novos Boost that we offer. So the ingredients in this, I'll just read through them very quickly, are glycine, malate in the form of magnesium malate. So you're also getting magnesium in this formula. Glucosamine sulfate, rhodiola rosea root extract, L-theanine, hyaluronic acid, fisetin, which I mentioned earlier, organic ginger root extract, specifically for the gingerols that are in it, pterostilbene I mentioned, and microdosed lithium, which is associated with improved brain health, psychological stability, and so on. The point is that this is at a trace level. It's only 1 milligram. If you think of prescription dosages, it's like 100, 200 times higher than this dosage. And this dosage is what we evolved with in our water supply, in our food. We always had lithium, but now with municipal water and filtered water, we don't get it anymore in our diet. But it's actually been found to be something that could be very good for brain health.
Yeah, what was the little study, or not study? There was an article that came out a while back with like, does everybody just need a little bit of lithium? And talked
New
about the
York
brain health and kind of emotional health that it was providing. And I know a lot of people started drinking the like what's the sparkling water?
San Pellegrino,
San Pellegrino, because it's got like the same
the
little
highest
trace
level.
amount. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Y'all got some good stuff in there that I think if people are going and buying, I know a lot of people who are going get, these hyaluronic acid supplements, rhodiola supplements, certainly glucosamine and glycine, all in separate places. So to knock that out in kind of one thing, quite powerful.
It simplifies everything. And I, as somebody who at one point in my life was taking probably 100 pills a day, now I'm down to like 5 pills a day and the Novos products. It's just like I'm traveling soon for about a month. And I just throw a whole bunch of these in my bag and I can put it in my back pocket when I go out for lunch and then mix it, wherever I am. So it's just very portable, convenient, tasty. We want to get people into habits. So who wants to swallow pills? That's not a fun habit. If it's something that tastes good, you now have this psychological attachment to it, a memory of it. Like, oh, something feels off today for lunch. What is it? Oh, I forgot my Novoscore packet. So the other product I'll mention very quickly, I mentioned Core and Boost. The newest product is Novos Vital, and these are daily chews. So they're similar to a gummy, but not quite as chewy. And that's because we have so many ingredients packed into these chews. You have 4 of them per day, and this is focused on organ health, specifically organs that decline with age. So your brain, eyes, heart, liver, kidneys, gut, and muscle. So 7 organs in one single formula. And they can help with digestion. It can help with detoxification. And it's really about optimizing these organs. So whereas Novos Core is a product and Novos Boost is a product that people in their even in their early 20s can start taking, I would say that Novos Vital is for somebody who is starting to feel some of the effects of aging. So maybe that's at around 30 years old, where people might be more likely to benefit from the Vital product.
That'll improve eyes, improve us being able to read signs and
Read,
stuff,
and
right?
especially night vision.
Yeah,
Yeah, so some the ingredients that we have in there have been found in studies to improve the ability to see at night.
that one's in my cart already, folks. uh, Chris, this has been awesome, man. I think a lot to for people to kind of double click on and really pull out and dive into some of y'all's writings and stuff. Thanks for this. Is there anything that you want the audience to maybe go back and look at? Where can they find you? Where can they find more about Novos? All the fun stuff.
Sure. So a few things. One is I have a personal blog. It's slowmyage.com. I am on uh, X and Instagram and recently TikTok as Slow My Age. Follow me on TikTok. I don't have that many followers yet. And then Novos, my company, is Novos Labs. We're on Instagram and all of the social networks, really. I would encourage people to download the Novos Life app. It's on Android and iOS. It's completely free. What I didn't mention earlier was that we have a free biological age clock in there. It's based on a survey and AI. It was created by this brilliant mathematician. Her name is Sue-In Lee. She won the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in mathematics, the Samsung Prize. And we adapted her work in our app, and we make it completely free. So you can get an estimate of your biological age through that without buying our blood test, which is more sophisticated. And then we also have essentially it's like a chat GPT, a chatbot built into our app that's trained on longevity. So we can answer your questions specific to the topic of longevity and can kind of be your partner in the process. So all of that is completely free because we're a public benefit corporation, and I'm trying to do as much as we can for the public interest. And then finally, we have something called Face Age, which people who are curious about their facial aging, which is correlated with biological aging, you can take a selfie, and with AI, we can tell you how young you look, how young your eyes look, and then skin health markers like wrinkles and inflammation and pore size and so on. And that's completely free, and that's called Novos Face Age. So if you search for Face Age or you go to our website and search for it, you'll find it there.
That's good stuff. The face age, we might have to make a little game out of that, folks. If y'all tag me and Chris in your face age,
Yeah.
you'll get something good. I don't know what it is yet, but we'll hook you up. Chris, we ask all of our guests, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, that was a bunch of great stuff, what's the one thing they can do to improve their health today?
Um, I think it's really just a shift in mindset, just staying on the theme of longevity, which is to understand that it's in your power and your control to determine how fast or slow you're aging. And just getting to that point where you realize that you can slow down your aging is so empowering that I think that that then forms the motivation to dig in and to start actually enacting change in your life. So first, the psychological shift by realizing that, then I think everything else starts to follow.
That's a fantastic answer. Chris, thank you for what y'all are putting out in the world. I have no doubt that Novos is going to do some amazing things, and you yourself kind of continue to improve and put positive information and help people kind of change their lives and longevity. Thank you for all that you're doing and making a dent in this whole health process, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy.